Good afternoon. And I still see some people who were here in the beginning. So, wow, kudos to you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your shiur. Once again, I would like to thank Serena and David Koshitsky for dedicating the program today in memory of Riva Koshitsky, Zichronah Livracha. And for this session, I'd like to thank as well Fred Birnbaum for dedicating this in honor of his wife Susan and their daughters Ricky, Sarah, and Leora, as well as Gila and Ilan Metz in memory of Ilan's grandmother, Miriam Bat Yitzchak Halevi, Zichronah Livracha, and Gila's grandmother, Chava Bat Yitzchak Natan, Zichronah Livracha. Also, at this point where we're just about at the end, I want to make sure to thank all of the speakers we've had throughout the day, as well as Mr. Dan Walter, who you've encountered at some point or another, setting up, cleaning up, ushering people in, giving them sheets, and so forth. And I'm grateful to Dan for all of his work. Now let's get started, because there's a lot to talk about with Bar Kochba's Etrog. It's on page 37 in the booklets, at least my booklet, it's page 37. I had a lot of fun with this one, putting this together. Learned a lot that was new to me. I brought you a source at the start of the sheet, which doesn't have to do with Bar Kochba, but I couldn't resist. An article appeared in Commentary back in 1958, titled "The Goodly Tree: Sacred and Profane History." Is the Etrog just an excuse for the Jews to exercise their passion for the difficult, for the formal, and above all, for argument? Such a view has been expressed before in the 4th century. For example, Methodius Eubulios, a Christian bishop and subsequent martyr, wrote that it was both shameful and foolish for the Jews to make such an issue over a lemon. Now, the truth of the matter is that he didn't actually say that. It's one of those things. It says live video stopped. I don't know if that matters. I'm here. I don't know. They'll figure it out there in a minute. If someone can just tell them out there that they can be started. Thanks. It's one of those things where someone says something and it's just so catchy that everybody starts to quote it. So I started looking for the basis for this and where this bishop actually said it, and found word for word the same quote in a bunch of different places, but no one actually chapter and verse, so to speak, until I found Methodius' writing, how each one ought to prepare himself for the future resurrection. And in it, and I brought it for you in number 2, for those who are interested in the bishop, what he says is that indeed the Jews misunderstand the Arba Minim. We misunderstand these species, because the Torah says, you shall take them on the first day. It refers to the first day of judgment in the future resurrection, and how the 4 species you're supposed to take are not actually plants, but they are actually a reference to good deeds that God desires of you. And he makes fun of the Etrog. That part of it is true. If you look at the second half of source number 2, he quotes you the verse, and he shall take you on the first day the boughs of goodly trees, branches of palm trees, the boughs of fig trees, willows of the brook, and ye shall rejoice before the Lord your God. And he says, the Jews uncircumcised in heart think that the most beautiful fruit of wood is the citron wood on account of its size. I don't know quite where that fits in. If the citron appears beautiful to you, why not the pomegranate and other fruits of trees, amongst them apples, which much surpass the citron? Indeed, in Song of Songs, Solomon, having made mention of all these fruits, passes over in silence the citron only. It's true, the Etrog doesn't make it into Shir HaShirim, at least in any explicit way. And his point is that we make such a big deal out of the Arba Minim, out of these 4 species, including the Etrog. And the truth of the matter is, while I think he's obviously wrong about the mitzvah in the Torah, I think he's right. We do make a big deal out of the Arba Minim, out of these 4 species. And what I want to talk about specifically is the way Jews took so seriously these 4 species in the time of Bar Kochba, and why these 4 species were such a big deal. And hopefully that will lend some inspiration for us when on Sukkot we take the Arba Minim. So first of all, a little bit of history of the Bar Kochba revolt would probably be helpful. Most of our records of the revolt actually come from Roman history, from Dio Cassius, who was writing about 60 years later. Nonetheless, his is considered the most accurate record. The documents that we have found of the revolt are actually largely not about anything military. They're largely government. Like, make sure so-and-so gets paid type of a thing. The military stuff was recorded more by the Romans. But a little bit of history before the revolt. We start in the year 68 of the Common Era, which is when the second Beis HaMikdash, the second temple, is destroyed. Jews are largely dispersed even from before that time. There were Jews who were fighting various forces even outside of the boundaries of the land of Israel in the decades that followed. Bar Kochba's revolt starts in the year 131 of the Common Era, and it runs until Tisha B'Av in the year 135, when Beitar, the last of the fortresses, is destroyed. Beitar was at the summit of a steep hill, about 7 miles southwest of Yerushalayim. According to one article I've read, the area of Beitar encompassed by the remaining walls is 8.7 acres. So don't think of it as this tiny little, fortress. This was very serious, and as we'll see, an awful lot of people were holed up there by the end. Bar Kochba's revolt was not simply his venture. It had the support of none other than Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva labels him essentially Mashiach, the Messiah. Bar Kochba's given name, we now know from his letters, was actually not Bar Kochba, not Bar Koziba, but Bar Kosba. Kavav Samach Bet Aleph was the way that it was written. Bar Kochba means the one of the star. And it's a reference to the biblical verse, Darach Kochav Miyakov, the star came forth from Jacob, and it's a messianic image. It's an image of Mashiach. If you take a look at source number 3, I brought you from the Rambam, from Maimonides, talking about the criteria to be Mashiach, to be the Messiah, and he says, don't imagine that the king Mashiach must perform signs and wonders or create new entities or resuscitate the dead or perform similar feats. It's not so. Rabbi Akiva was one of the wise sages of the Mishnah. He was an aide to Ben Koziva the king. He said that Ben Koziva was the king Mashiach. He and all the sages of his generation imagined that Ben Koziva was the king Mashiach until he was killed for his sins. For his sins is a reference to the passage in the Talmud we're not going to go into right now. Once he was killed, it was known to them Ben Koziva was not it. They didn't ask him for signs or wonders. You didn't have to be a miracle worker in order to be Mashiach, and Rabbi Akiva believed that in fact he would be. He uses the term Ben Koziva. That's a term that we find in Midrash after the fall of the revolt, because the root, Kaf Zayin Bet, Koziva, that root is a reference to what? What does that mean? False, right? Or, right, like Kazav, Kol Adam Kozev, or? Also, Lehit Achzev is to be disappointed. Right? It was the disappointment or it was the lie. That's the way they turn on you in the community. You should know, right? You're a star until suddenly you're not. But the image here is of a revolt that was incredibly dramatic and incredibly inspiring for the Jews of the time. And Bar Kochba himself is this incredibly mighty warrior. We get descriptions which sound so dramatic. Apparently he was really good at parkour, because he's described at leaping from walls and then killing the enemy and then quickly rescaling the wall and catching stones that had been hurled with a catapult and throwing them back. But the facts that we have support the stories of his power. If you take a look at source number 4, Dio Cassius, in his Roman record of the fall of Beitar, of Bar Kochba's last fortress, he says very few of them, of the Jews, in fact survived. 50 of their most important outposts and 985 of their most famous villages were razed to the ground. 580,000 men were slain in the various raids and battles, and the number of those who perished by famine, disease, and fire was past finding out. And when you look in the Talmud also, you get these incredibly large numbers. Many Romans, moreover, perished in this war. Therefore, Hadrian, in writing to the Senate, did not employ the opening phrase commonly affected by the emperors, quote, "If you and your children are in health, it is well, I and the legions are in health." He didn't write that after his fight with Bar Kochba. He didn't say that we're in health. The Romans suffered, in fact, heavy losses during this 3.5-year revolt. that's just background on Bar Kochba's revolt. But let's talk about the Arba Minim, the 4 species of Sukkot, and their place for Bar Kochba. So first of all, the coins of the Bar Kochba revolt. He had his own currency. The currency is actually mentioned in the Talmud. I brought you an example of it in source number 5. Just to show you that it's referred to, the context doesn't matter for our purposes. And the coins were often marked Shimon, Simon, as in Shimon Bar Kochba, Nisi Yisrael, the Prince of Israel. And I'm going to come back to the importance of that term Nasi a little bit later. They also mentioned an Elazar Kohen Gadol, and there's a lot of debate as to who this figure Elazar Kohen Gadol could have been. But that's also a discussion for another time. But the coins, many of them had on them images of the Arba Minim or just the Etrog. I was going to bring you pictures on the sheet, but when you try to print black and white copies of sheets with the coins, it doesn't look good. So I'm going to suggest instead that you look online. You can find pictures around. A lot of work in particular went into a paper called Botanics and Iconography, Images of the Lulav and the Etrog, by Professor Rivka Ben Sasson. And it's an excellent paper and has very good pictures of the coins as well. Take a look, please, at source number 6. She says, the 4 species of plants which are taken in hand during the Sukkot festival are represented in Jewish art from its very inception. For example, on the coins that were struck during the 4th year of the first revolt against the Romans, that's when the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. They appear again on the coins marking the 1st and 4th years of the Bar Kochba revolt, as well as on clay oil lamps from the same period. These coins were very significant in that period. And interestingly, they change. When you look at the coins from the destruction of the temple, from the 68, 69, 70, from that period of time, you get this very lush and full greenery. You have the lulav, and then you have branches all over the place. However, when you get to the coins in Bar Kochba's revolt, what you find instead is a single lulav and a branch going here and a branch going there. What changed? Take a look at source number 7, Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is author of the view in the Mishnah that in fact you just take one lulav, one etrog, one hadas, and one arava, one myrtle branch, one willow branch, and that's it, and one palm branch. So Bar Kochba, whose rabbi, so to speak, is Rabbi Akiva, so his coins match the view of Rabbi Akiva. There are many views in the Mishnah about how many branches to take, but his coins match the view of Rabbi Akiva. But that's one example of the importance that the Arba Minim had in that period, and particularly in the time of Bar Kochba. The more interesting example to me is the archives of letters found in a place called Nachal Chever. Let's go back to the 1950s. What's the biggest archaeological discovery in Judaism? You could argue really in the 20th century, but certainly in that period of time? Qumran, right, the Dead Sea Scrolls that are found in Qumran, which date back to the Roman period. Well, after the Dead Sea Scrolls are discovered in Qumran, the Bedouins know a good thing, right? And they say, the Jews are willing to pay top dollar in order to get a hold of this. Let's go looking and see if there's anything else. So they go looking in the Midbar Yehuda region, the Judean desert, for more caves that have scrolls. So in 1951, you know what's going to happen if they don't find anything, then they'll make something. They actually did find. In 1951, they found a cache of documents in a place called Nachal Darga, also known as Wadi Murabat, not far from the Herodium, which was in fact one of Bar Kochba's headquarters, right near Yam HaMelech, right near the Dead Sea, and it dates back to the 1st century Common Era, and it included a letter of Bar Kochba. Then, in the early 1950s, and then further in an expedition in 1960, they found many more Bar Kochba letters in this place called Nachal Chever, which is south of Qumran. It's not that far from En Gedi, and also from Yam HaMelech, from the Dead Sea. Worth noting, another cache that was found there is called the Babata cache, and it's very, very important because Babata was a Jewish matron of the time from Yerushalayim, and she was extremely wealthy. And what we find there, among other things, is, as far as as I am aware, the oldest known ketubah. It's the ketubah from her marriage to her second husband, and it matches in many significant ways the ketubot that we still use today. So you find this first century common era ketubah, and it matches what we're doing 2,000 years later. That's also found in Nachal Chever. But I want to go back to the Bar Kochba letters. There are two letters there that relate to the Arba Minim, to the 4 species. If you take a look at source number 8, you find Papyrus Yadin. Yadin, of course, is Yigal Yadin, right? Papyrus Yadin number 57. And here's the text. I'm going to read the English translation here. You can see the original Aramaic. Simon to Yehuda, son of Menashe, to Kiryat Arabia. Simon as in? That Simon Bar Kochba. I have sent you 2 donkeys, for you to send with them 2 men, to Yehonatan son of Be'en and to Masabala, to load them and send them to the camp. To you, palm branches and citrons. And send others from you, let them bring you myrtles and willow branches. And prepare them and send them to the camp, because the masses are many. Shalom. That's what he writes. It took me a long time going through this letter, trying to figure out who was sending what to whom. It's not so clear cut, and the historian Chaim Lapin has done some work on this, on who is sending what to where. But the message, the core piece of this is that Bar Kochba is sending men and donkeys to help bring Arba Minim, to help bring the 4 species in advance of Sukkot. Historians agree that this is the year 134 of the Common Era, as in the very end of the revolt. Things are going awfully at this point. Most of the fortresses have fallen. The masses are many in their fortress because the population is collapsing. As the fortresses are destroyed, they just keep moving till finally they're all condensed in Beitar. And this is what Bar Kochba is spending his time on. Make sure we have Lulav and Etrog. That's what he's concerned about. Not only that, take a look at source number 9, which is a letter that's actually originally written in Greek, and you'll see that from the text itself. So the translation is not mine; it's Chaim Lapin's translation. In number 9, Sumayos, to Jonathan, son of Bayanos, and to Masabala, greetings. Since I have sent Agrippa to you, hurry and send me wands, meaning lulav branches, and citrons. Provide these for the camp of the Jews, and do not do otherwise. It, the letter, was written in Greek because of no means having been found to write it in Hebrew. Release Agrippa quickly because of the festival, do not do otherwise. Sumayos, greetings. This fellow Sumayos, who writes in Greek and doesn't know Hebrew, is generally assumed to have been a Nabatean. He was a non-Jew who was an ally of the Jewish rebels. There were allies of the Jews. There were non-Jews who actually joined our forces for a variety of reasons. He's not Bar Kochba's scribe. You know that, first of all, because Bar Kochba's scribe would have known Hebrew. Number 1. And number 2, he talks about the Jews in the third person, right? Send it to the Jewish camp. It's not about sending it to us. But it's a second request to make sure that the letter, that the Lav and Etrog, that these species are going to be sent quickly. And so our big question is, at this point, like, you're at the very end here. At this point, this is what Bar Kochba is spending his time on and having his men wary about. Why are the Arba Minim so important? Why are these 4 species so important? We don't have a similar letter like, send us flour that we can use for matzah, for Passover. Certainly nothing about blintzes. What is it about these 4 species that puts them on coins that makes them such a focus? So I would note something that I don't think is an answer, but people I think are not aware of, and it goes back actually towards what Rabbi Aviner was talking about with eating the etrog. The etrog was actually, believe it or not, a Roman luxury item. And And yes, there were people who ate them back then. If you take a look at source number 10, it describes how after Hoshana Rabbah, after the 7th day of Sukkot, when we would use the lulav and etrog, it says immediately the children release their lulavim and eat their etrogim. And the Talmud in Avodah Zarah has a comment about cutting the etrog with a knife and it having a sharp taste and affecting the kashrut of the knife. So even though I'm with you, right, I'm not an etrog eater, nonetheless, it does seem like some people ate it, and it seems to have been considered a luxury item for Romans. Anyone know the Latin name for etrog? Not familiar? Citrus medica. Very good, Johannes. Right. Citrus medica. It was considered to be medically beneficial. In the 2nd century before the Common Era, Galen, in his medical works, provided recipes for people, presumably ones with a lot of sugar in them, which could have been medical also. But there's research out of Tel Aviv University in 2017 which talks about this. I bring you an excerpt here in number 11. New research from Tel Aviv University reveals that citrons and lemons were clear status symbols for the ancient Roman ruling elite and plots the root and evolution of the citrus trade in the ancient Mediterranean. Until the 1st century Common Era, the only citrus produce available to the ancient Romans were the extremely rare and inordinately expensive, even then, citrons and lemons. It was a valuable commodity, and so forth. I came across this when I was trying to understand the Gemara in Avodah Zarah. The Gemara in Avodah Zarah, Daf Tet, is talking about wine that's been handled, a Jew's wine that's been handled by someone who isn't Jewish. And it talks about a case in which somebody who's not Jewish drops an etrog into the Jew's wine and then reaches in to grab the etrog and take it out. And the question is, what about the status of the wine? But I'm reading that Gemara and asking myself, number one, why does the Roman guy have an etrog? And number two, if he dropped it into the wine, why does he care enough to go, bobbing for estrogim? What's that about? But the answer really is, as the research discloses, apparently it was a luxury item for the Romans. So that's just an interesting bit of information. But it doesn't really explain why Bar Kochba would have prioritized these 4 species. I'd like to offer 4 possible reasons for his emphasis on them. First of all, the group in Beitar was that concerned about mitzvot. We know that they observed mitzvot beyond just Sukkot, beyond the holiday with the 4 species. Their letters refer to Shabbat. This letter about the 4 species seems to refer to tithing, to Truma and Maaser. The Talmud in Yevamot, I brought it for you in source number 12, says that that in Bar Kochba's revolt they restored Brit Milah, they restored circumcision. So, on a very simple and straightforward level, they were concerned for mitzvot. But that doesn't explain why you're getting letters about the 4 species and not anything else, and why they're showing up on coins and nothing else is showing up on the coins. So a second explanation. The Arba Minim, the 4 species, were actually a symbol of the land of Israel at that time, not only for us, but the Romans as well. If you take a look at source number 13 from Professor Ben Sasson's work, she notes, after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, the Romans minted a coin to celebrate their victory, bearing the inscription Judea Capta, where the symbol of Judea is a palm tree under which sits a feminine figure guarded by a Roman soldier. Flipping the page, returning to the relatively few depictions of the date palm in mosaics of the land of Israel, I can make an assumption. In Jewish consciousness, the date palm represented Judea and its independence, as symbolized on those Roman coins that we just mentioned before. On these coins, Judea is represented by a palm tree and the people by a mourning woman. Perhaps Bar Kochba's use of the same symbol to awaken the national feelings of the people of Judea, followed by the disastrous consequences of the uprising, led to the limitation in the use of this visual symbol. In other words, after the time of Bar Kochba, you don't find these in mosaics. They stop using it because they view it as a symbol of a failed rebellion. But in Bar Kochba's time, that was a symbol of the land of Israel, and therefore it was important that we have it. You follow? Clear? Okay. So that's a second approach. Third approach. The 4 species in rabbinic writing are often seen as a sign of victory. So take a look at source number 14 in Midrash on Tehillim, my translation here. The sages said, the lulav in the right, the etrog in the left, when you circle the altar on Sukkot. Why? Verse from Tehillim, from Psalms, the pleasant items are in your right for victory. This refers to the one who takes the lulav in the right and is victorious with the branches. Customarily, competitors race in the arena, and who takes the branches? The one who wins. In other words, the image is almost like, if you think of like a wreath, right? Symbolizing who won, like the Olympic wreath type of a thing. So the carrying the branches is a sign of being victorious. It's a sign of winning. The Greeks, of course, we know, held parades with branches as a victory symbol. I brought you from Plutarch at number 15, but I'm skipping it in the interest of time. So this would be a morale booster. With the revolt under threat, here we are parading around in our fortress carrying branches that symbolize victory. Anyone who wants to know more about that, I didn't include it on the sheet. I wrote an article a couple of years ago for the YU To Go publication for Sukkot and talked about how the parade on Sukkot with these four species is viewed as a sign of our victory, not over the Romans, but for us it's viewed as a victory in our judgment on Yom Kippur. That adds a dimension. But it's three explanations so far. Number one, they were simply very religious people, and so the four species were valuable to them. Second approach is that it was the four species represented Israel at the time. And third, they're a sign of victory. But fourth, and I think strongest, goes back to something that I think I heard Rabbi Bergman talk about in his talk earlier, which is the connection between Sukkot and Mashiach. This was a time that really suited a messianic approach. First of all, it's the year 135. It is roughly 65 or 67 years from the fall of the temple. Remember that the second temple is built 70 years after the destruction of the first. They're now thinking the time is here. We're supposed to throw off the Romans and again, we will be restored. That's number one. It's the right year. But also Sukkot is associated with Mashiach. Professor Ben Sasson notes something very important. I gave you a reference to it in number 16, which is the first Beit HaMikdash, the first temple, was dedicated in the month of Tishrei, juxtaposed with Sukkot. Right? There's a whole discussion about how we don't mix celebrations, and so it was 7 days of the dedication and then 7 days of the holiday of Sukkot. The second temple, the second Beit HaMikdash, in source number 17, also, they bring their initial offerings with the holiday of Sukkot. It's associated with the dedication and rededication of the Beit HaMikdash, of the temple, and then at the end of Zechariah, in source number 18, we get that call for the nations who had ascended to attack Jerusalem. Now they shall come and celebrate the holiday of Sukkot. Why specifically should the nations show up on Sukkot? So there are a variety of different explanations, but the simplest one is offered by Radak. That's when the war against Jerusalem, the final war against Jerusalem, takes place on Sukkot, and therefore every year they shall come on Sukkot in order to celebrate. Last two notes regarding this. Number one, the Nasi title that we mentioned before for Bar Kochba, that title is associated in the book of Yechezkel with Mashiach. That's number one. And then number two, it's noted, I brought it for you in this paper by Brian Bernstein, number 19, the coins of Bar Kochba, the letters that were on those coins, the text, the alphabet that they used, was the type of alphabet that we use. It's called Paleo-Semitic, from the first Beis HaMikdash, from the first temple times. What he's trying to do is call to mind the independent Jewish state that had existed back then. That's what he wants to reestablish. So there is this inspiration of let's celebrate with these four species, even at a time when the ship is going down, even at a time when the Romans are closing in. Nonetheless, this is going to be our inspiration to keep on fighting. And so far, I think for all four of these reasons, they push this. Number one, it's a mitzvah, and they were willing to sacrifice for it. Number two, it was a symbol of Israel against Rome. Number three, it was a morale-boosting sign of victory. And number four, it was an emblem of the time of Mashiach, and so may it be for us today. Thank you very much.